He lost 25 of them. That is how the son of Peter Thomson liked to put it, standing before more than 1,000 mourners in the dining room of the Melbourne cricket ground, and there was laughter in the room because there was truth in it. 30 times the old man walked the links of Britain in pursuit of the Open Championship, and 25 of those journeys ended with somebody else lifting the Claret Jug. Only a mind as clean and unsentimental as his could have counted it that way, could have taken the greatest record any Australian ever built in the game of golf and turned it upside down to find the losses. But that was Tommo. He measured himself against the plain arithmetic of the thing, not against the noise of it. And in the plain arithmetic of the thing, 5 of those 30 opens came home to a boy from Brunswick who had once crawled under a fence with a set of borrowed hickory clubs to steal a few holes on a 9-hole council course near the Melbourne Zoo. You have to picture that boy first, before any of the rest of it makes sense. West Brunswick in the 1930s was a working suburb of Melbourne. All red brick and corrugated iron and washing lines strung across narrow yards, and across the road from where the Thompsons lived there was a scrappy little public course called Royal Park. 9 holes laid out on hard ground near the zoo. Peter was the eldest of 4 sons. His father, Arthur, was a signwriter, a man who made his living with a steady hand and a careful eye, and his mother, Grace, was a dressmaker who ran her needle through the family's tight budget and, later, ran her worry through her son's stubborn decision to throw away a respectable trade for the uncertain life of a professional golfer. There was no money in the house for green fees. There was barely money for the things a growing family of boys needed. So the boy did what boys with empty pockets and full hearts have always done. He found a way in. He scrounged a set of old hickory-shafted clubs, the kind that were already going out of fashion, and he hunted golf balls in the long grass between the hedgerows and the railway line that ran past the course. And that patch of rough ground became, as he put it many years later, his treasure trove. During the war, the course stood half empty, and an unsupervised boy could play as long as the light held. The turf at Royal Park ran firm and fast, baked hard by the Melbourne summers, dust rising off the fairways in the north wind, and a lad learning his craft there learned to keep the ball low, to run it up onto greens rather than throw it high into the sky, to think about the bounce and the roll and the meanness of a dry lie. He could not have known it then, but he was serving an apprenticeship in exactly the kind of golf that would one day carry him to glory on the seaside links of Scotland and England, where the wind comes off the grey water and punishes anyone foolish enough to fight it. There is a quiet clue in something he said long afterward, an admission that tells you as much about the man as any scorecard ever could. "It attracted me," he said of the game. "It drew me to it. It wasn't the other way around. I didn't have a lot of friends. I was a bit of a loner. That's the golfer's life, I think. A loner." Turn that word over in your hand for a moment, because it sits at the center of everything. Golf is the loneliest of the great games. There is no team to hide inside, no captain to blame, no crowd to carry you when your own nerve fails. There is only you and the ball and the wind and the terrible privacy of your own decisions. And here was a boy who did not mind that privacy, who in fact seemed to need it. A boy who was more comfortable working out a problem on his own than laughing it off in company. He was clever with his hands and cleverer with his head. He took a diploma in applied chemistry at the technical school and went to work as a rubber technologist, testing golf balls for a sporting goods firm in Melbourne, a young man in a laboratory coat measuring the flight and the bounce of the very thing he loved. You can almost see the 2 halves of him in that image: the chemist who wanted to understand why the ball behaved as it did, and the sportsman who simply wanted to make it obey. His mother did not want him to go. That is a small detail that gets lost in the telling of great sporting lives, but it deserves its place. When he won the club championship at Royal Park as a teenager and joined Victoria Golf Club down in the famous Sandbelt, and when he began to speak seriously of turning professional, Grace Thomson protested. A professional golfer, in the Australia of the late 1940s, was not quite a respectable thing to be. It was a semi-vagabond existence, chasing modest purses around a thin circuit of tournaments, living out of a suitcase, no pension, no security, nothing certain but the next long drive to the next dusty town. She had raised him to have a trade in his hands, and he turned it down. He turned professional in 1949, and within a year he had won the New Zealand Open, and the year after that, the Australian Open, and the boy who wasn't supposed to make a living from a game was suddenly the most promising thing in Australian golf. Then came the ships. This is the part that the modern mind struggles to grasp, sitting as we do in an age when a golfer can play in California on a Sunday and tee it up in Scotland the following Thursday. In Thomson's day, an Australian who wanted to test himself against the world got on a boat. Weeks at sea, rolling across the Indian Ocean and up through the Suez, arriving pale and stiff-legged in a cold northern spring to face the best players in the world on courses he had never seen. He first sailed for Britain and finished 6th in the Open of 1951 at Royal Portrush. A slim young man of 21, and it was clear at once that this outsider from the colonies had something the locals could not quite explain. He finished second in 1952. He finished second again in 1953. And then, at Royal Birkdale in 1954, at the age of 24, he won. He would win it again in 1955, and again in 1956. 3 in a row. Say that slowly, because in the long history of the Open Championship, stretching back to 1860 and the days of the great whiskered Scots, only a tiny handful of men have ever won it 3 years running, and Thomson is the only man in the whole of the 20th century to do it. Young Tom Morris did it in the 1870s with a gutta-percha ball and a hickory shaft, and then nobody managed it for the better part of 100 years until a quiet Australian who talked about golf as though it were a game of chess put together a run that will very likely never be equaled. He was, said the great English broadcaster Peter Thomson, the first person to play golf as if it were chess. There it is, the whole secret of him in a single sentence. Where other men attacked, Thomson plotted. Where other men gambled, he calculated the odds and quietly declined the bet. His grip was light, his manner brisk, his swing so free of unnecessary movement that watching him was like watching a man cross a room. There were no frills, said his countryman Norman von Nieder, so virtually nothing could go wrong. To understand what that meant, you have to understand what an Open Championship was in those years, and what it cost a man in body and nerve. The links of Britain are nothing like the manicured parkland courses of the modern American tour, all soft green fairways and receptive greens. They are wild, ancient stretches of ground hard against the sea, dune and hollow and pot bunker, the turf tight and running, the weather coming off the water in sheets. 1 hour the sun is out and the sea sparkles like a promise. The next, the wind has swung round and the rain is coming sideways, and a man can lose 4 strokes to the field simply by being on the wrong hole at the wrong moment. The Americans hated it. It offended their sense of order. But Thomson, who had grown up hitting low runners across the baked ground of Royal Park in the Melbourne heat, took to it the way a fish takes to water. He understood the bounce. He read the ground the way his father read a line of lettering, and he plotted his way around those brutal old courses with a serenity that unsettled his rivals. He never tried to overpower a lynx. He never tried to carry the ball to places the wind would not let it go. He accepted what the ground and the weather offered him, and quietly, patiently, over 4 days, he took it apart. He was reliable and occasionally brilliant with the putter, and pressure seemed to slide off him like water off oilskin. Where others tightened, he loosened. Where others raged at their luck, he studied it. He added a 4th Open in 1958, and by then a certain sourness had crept into the way some people spoke of him. The Americans, they said, weren't there. The best players in the world in those years were on the far side of the Atlantic, and few of them thought it worth the long journey and the small prize money to contest a championship on windswept links they neither liked nor understood. Thomson was winning, the whisper went, against a weakened field. It was unfair, and it stung, and being the man he was, he did not spend his breath arguing about it. He simply waited. He waited 7 years, until 1965, until the Open had grown back into the genuine championship of the world, until the field at Royal Birkdale contained Arnold Palmer at the height of his powers, and a young Jack Nicklaus already bending the game to his will, and Gary Player, and the defending champion Tony Lima. And there, at 35, on the same links where he had won his first, Peter Thomson beat the lot of them. His fifth Claret Jug, and the one he prized above all the others, because it silenced the whisper forever. Only Harry Vardon, in the golden age before the First War, had ever won the thing more often. But here is where the story has to turn, because a life is not a list of trophies, and the man who won those 5 Opens was living a whole other life in the spaces between them, a life of long absences and quiet strains and losses that no scorecard records. He had married young. In 1952, on the cusp of his fame, golf champion Peter William Thomson married Miss Lois Rita Brower, and the newspapers of the day noted with a smile that the couple played golf on their honeymoon. There was a daughter, Deirdre, but the marriage did not hold. The endless travelling, the months at sea, the ruthless single-mindedness that made him a champion and made him, by his own quiet confession, a loner even in a crowd, all of it took its toll, and the union ended in divorce. This was the 1950s, remember, in a Melbourne that did not talk easily about such things, and a man carried a failed marriage quietly, like a stone in his coat pocket. In 1960, he married again, this time in London, a woman named Mary Kelly, and this time it held for the rest of his life, 58 years, until the very end. Mary gave him 3 more children, his daughters Peter Ann, known always as Pan, and Fiona, and his son Andrew. 4 children across 2 marriages, a family stitched together across the fault line of a divorce, and a father who was, for great stretches of their childhoods, somewhere on the other side of the world. Think about what that meant in the age before easy flight. When Thomson sailed for Britain, he was gone for months. There were no phone calls home, or none that were quick or cheap. There were letters that arrived weeks after they were written. A man might miss the whole of an English summer and a whole season of his children growing, and come home to find them changed. He filled some of those lonely hours abroad by writing, sending back cogent, elegant dispatches to the Melbourne Herald and, over the better part of 50 years, to the Age, becoming that rare thing, a champion who could also describe the game in prose as clean as his swing. He read widely. He loved the opera. He painted. He was, as one who knew him put it, a balanced man in a world that usually rewards only the obsessive and the narrow. And that balance was both his gift and, perhaps, the thing that stopped him from ever quite conquering America, the way a Palmer or a Nicklaus did. He would not uproot his family and his whole life to chase the American dollar. He played only a handful of seasons there, won only once, the Texas Open of 1956, where he closed with a scarcely believable 63 and beat 2 of the finest American players in a playoff. He could have been one of the great figures of the American tour. He chose instead to remain himself and to remain, in his bones, an Australian who went home. And the Opens, remember, were only the crown on a mountain of victories most people never bother to count. He won the New Zealand Open 9 times across 2 decades, so often that the tournament almost seemed his personal property, year after year holding off his great friend and rival Kel Nagle across the Tasman. He won the Australian Open 3 times on home soil. He won across Europe more than 24 times, and 11 more times through Asia and Japan, so that his tournament wins around the world ran past 90 by most reckonings, past 100 by others. He collected national opens in something like 10 different countries. He was a wanderer of the game in an age when wandering meant weeks aboard ship and long hauls by train and motorcar between distant tournaments, and he did it not for one glorious summer, but for the better part of 30 years, always packing the bag again, always saying goodbye at the door, always turning his back on Melbourne to chase the ball across the far side of the world. There is a whole life of departures inside that record, a whole ledger of family dinners missed and birthdays marked from a hotel room in a cold country, and it never showed on the smooth, untroubled surface of him. There is a photograph, if you go looking, of a young Peter Thomson at Southport in 1954, holding the Open Trophy, his first wife Lois beside him in the northern sunshine. And there is another, from years later, of him with Mary at Buckingham Palace, holding the insignia of a Commander of the Order of the British Empire. 2 women, 2 chapters, one long and complicated life running underneath the smooth surface of the champion the public thought they knew. He did not wear his private griefs in public. That was not his way, nor was it the way of his generation of Australian men, who had been raised in the shadow of a depression and a war, and had learned to keep their troubles behind their teeth. By the late 1970s, the great playing days were behind him. He was nearing 50, and a man cannot chase the ball around the links forever. Most champions, when they reach that cliff edge, feel the ground fall away beneath them. The roar of the crowd stops, the phone stops ringing, the empty afternoons stretch out, and more than one great sportsman has drowned in the silence that follows the applause. Thomson did not drown. He had spent his whole life being more than a golfer, and now he became more than a golfer in earnest. He had begun designing golf courses back in the 1960s, partnering with the architect Michael Woolveridge, and now he threw himself into it fully. Over more than 50 years, he and his partners, among them Ross Perrett, would lay out more than 180 courses in over 30 countries. A body of work scattered across Asia and Australia and beyond, shaping the ground itself for generations of golfers who would never see him swing a club. He was drawn especially to Asia, where he helped establish the professional circuits that would one day produce champions of their own. He served as president of the Professional Golfers Association of Australia for 32 years, from 1962 until 1994. An astonishing span of stewardship, becoming, in his later decades, the very godfather of the Australian game. He tried politics too, which tells you something about the restlessness of the man. In 1982, he stood for a seat in the Victorian State Parliament, a conservative by temperament, a believer in effort and self-reliance, and the plain virtues he had been raised on, and he lost, narrowly. He might have made a fine parliamentarian. He had the clear mind for it, and the gift for plain speech. Asked once, late in life, how he would like to be remembered, he did not reach for anything about trophies or records. A guy, he said, who always said what he thought. And then, in a final twist that the storyteller could hardly have invented, the game gave him one last stage. The American Senior Tour, the circuit for players over 50, had just begun, and here at last was a chance to beat the Americans on their own soil, the thing his critics had said he could never do. He was well into his 50s now, greying, a grandfather. It did not matter. In 1985, he won 9 tournaments in a single season, a record that stood for years and topped the money list, and proved beyond any argument that the boy from Brunswick could still take the measure of the best of them when it counted. He had answered the whisper twice over now, once at Birkdale in 1965 and once again in the twilight, and after that he could put the clubs away in peace. He was not finished serving the game though. In 1998, at Royal Melbourne, on the very sandbelt where he had learned to play as a boy, he captained the international team to victory over the United States in the President's Cup. It remains, to this day, the only time that team has ever won, and it was fitting almost beyond words that the one man to lead them home was the quiet Australian who had spent his whole life proving that the world did not begin and end in America. He captained the losing sides in 1996 and 2000 as well, and took those defeats as he took everything, with a dry wit and a clear eye and no fuss. The last chapter came slowly and cruelly, the way it so often does. Parkinson's disease took hold of him in his final years, the trembling illness that steals the very thing a golfer prizes most, the steadiness of the hands, the calm of the body, the effortless motion through the ball that Norman von Nida had once said left nothing to go wrong. Now everything went wrong, slowly, in the private way that such things do. He withdrew from public life, and on the 20th of June 2018, in his home in Toorak, surrounded by most of his family, with Mary beside him, Peter Thomson died, aged 88. He left behind his wife, his 4 children, 11 grandchildren, 4 great-grandchildren, and 180 golf courses, and 5 claret jugs, and half a century of newspaper columns, and the memory of the cleanest swing anyone had ever seen. When they gathered at the MCG to farewell him, the chief executive of the Royal and Ancient flew all the way from Scotland and brought with him the Open Trophy, the actual claret jug that Thomson had won 5 times, and set it at the front of the room. Mary said it was something they least expected, and it left them stunned with awe. Imagine that, the oldest trophy in golf, carried across the world to sit beside the coffin of the boy who once hunted lost balls along a railway line because his family could not afford the green fees. He said, near the end of it all, that he had lived a very joyful life playing a game he loved for the sheer pleasure of it, and that he didn't think he had done a real day's work in the whole of his life. It was a lovely thing to say, and it was almost true, and it was also the gentle deception of a proud man, because of course it had been work, the loneliest and most demanding kind, all those years at sea, all those months away from his children, all those quiet mornings walking a foreign fairway in the cold northern rain, while the rest of the family slept an ocean away. He simply never counted it as work, the way he never counted the 5 wins as anything to boast of, the way he counted the 30 opens and told his son to remember the 25 losses. There was a humility in him that the modern game has almost entirely forgotten, a sense that a man was measured not by the noise he made, but by the quality of his thinking and the plainness of his word. He was the thinking man's golfer, and he was the thinking man, and somewhere out on the sandbelt on a hot February afternoon, when the north wind lifts the dust off a fast, dry fairway and a ball runs low and true toward a distant green, there are old men who remember and who understand exactly what has been lost, and who will tell you, if you stand still long enough to listen, that they never saw anyone quite like Tommo and never expect to again.